My dear fellow, I congratulate you most warmly,
he said.
It is the finest portrait of modern times. Mr. Gray, come over and look at yourself.
The lad started as if awakened from some dream.
Is it really finished?
He murmured, stepping down from the platform.
Quite finished,
said the painter.
And you have sat splendidly today. I am awfully obliged to you.
That is entirely due to me,
broke in Lord Henry.
Isn't it, Mr. Gray?
Dorian made no answer, but passed listlessly in front of his picture, and turned towards it. When he saw it, he drew back, and his cheeks flushed for a moment with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes, as if he had recognized himself for the first time. He stood there motionless and in wonder, dimly conscious that Hallward was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. He had never felt it before. Basil Hallward's compliments had seemed to him to be merely the charming exaggeration of friendship. He had listened to them, laughed at them, forgotten them. They had not influenced his nature. Then had come Lord Henry Wotton, with his strange panegyric on youth, his terrible warning of its brevity. That had stirred him at the time, and now, as he stood gazing at the shadow of his own loveliness, the full reality of the description flashed across him. Yes, there would be a day when his face would be wrinkled and wizen, his eyes dim and colourless, the grace of his figure broken and deformed. The scarlet would pass away from his lips, and the gold steal from his hair. The life that was to make his soul would mar his body. He would become dreadful, hideous, and uncouth. As he thought of it, a sharp pang of pain struck through him like a knife, and made each delicate fibre of his nature quiver. His eyes deepened into amethyst, and across them came a mist of tears. He felt as if a hand of ice had been laid upon his heart.
"Don't you like it?"
cried Hallward at last, stung a little by the lad's silence, not understanding what it meant.
"Of course he likes it,"
said Lord Henry.
"Who wouldn't like it? It is one of the greatest things in modern art. I will give you anything you like to ask for it. I must have it."
"It is not my property, Harry."
"Whose property is it?"
"Dorian's, of course,"
answered the painter.
"He is a very lucky fellow."
How sad it is,
murmured Dorian Gray, with his eyes still fixed upon his own portrait.
How sad it is. I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful. But this picture will remain always young. It will never be older than this particular day of June. If it were only the other way! If it were I who was to be always young, and the picture that was to grow old! For that I would give everything. Yes, there is nothing in the whole world I would not give. I would give my soul for that.
"You would hardly care for such an arrangement, Basil,"
cried Lord Henry, laughing.
"It would be rather hard lines on your work."
"I should object very strongly, Harry,"
said Hallward. Dorian Gray turned and looked at him.
I believe you would, Basil. You like your art better than your friends. I am no more to you than a green bronze figure. Hardly as much, I dare say.
The painter stared in amazement. It was so unlike Dorian to speak like that. What had happened? He seemed quite angry. His face was flushed and his cheeks burning.
Yes,
he continued.
I am less to you than your ivory Hermes or your silver fawn. You will like them always. How long will you like me? Till I have my first wrinkle, I suppose. I know now that when one loses one's good looks, whatever they may be, one loses everything. Your picture has taught me that. Lord Henry Wotton is perfectly right. Youth is the only thing worth having. When I find that I am growing old, I shall kill myself."
Hallward turned pale and caught his hand.
Dorian, Dorian,
He cried.
don't talk like that. I have never had such a friend as you, and I shall never have such another. You are not jealous of material things, are you? You who are finer than any of them?
I am jealous of everything whose beauty does not die. I am jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? Every day that passes takes something from me and gives something to it. Oh, if it were only the other way! If the picture could change, and I could be always what I am now! Why did you paint it? It will mock me some day, mock me horribly.
The hot tears welled into his eyes. He tore his hand away, and flinging himself on the divan, he buried his face in the cushions, as though he was praying.
This is your doing, Harry,
said the painter bitterly. Lord Henry shrugged his shoulders.
It is the real Dorian Gray, that is all.
It is not.
If it is not, what have I to do with it?
You should have gone away when I asked you,
he muttered.
I stayed when you asked me,
was Lord Henry's answer.
Harry, I can't quarrel with my two best friends at once, but between you both, you have made me hate the finest piece of work I have ever done, and I will destroy it. What is it but canvas and colour? I will not let it come across our 3 lives and mar them.
Dorian Gray lifted his golden head from the pillow, and with pallid face and tear-stained eyes looked at him as he walked over to the deal painting table that was set beneath the high curtained window. What was he doing there? His fingers were straying about among the litter of tin tubes and dry brushes, seeking for something. Yes, it was for the long palette knife with its thin blade of lithe steel. He had found it at last. He was going to rip up the canvas. With a stifled sob, the lad leaped from the couch, and rushing over to Hallward, tore the knife out of his hand, and flung it to the end of the studio.
"Don't, Basil, don't!"
he cried.
"It would be murder."
I am glad you appreciate my work at last, Dorian,
said the painter coldly, when he had recovered from his surprise.
I never thought you would.
Appreciate it? I am in love with it, Basil. It is part of myself. I feel that.
Well, as soon as you are dry, you shall be varnished and framed and sent home. Then you can do what you like with yourself.
And he walked across the room and rang the bell for tea.
You will have tea, of course, Dorian, and so will you, Harry, or do you object to such simple pleasures?
I adore simple pleasures,
said Lord Henry.
They are the last refuge of the complex, but I don't like scenes except on the stage. What absurd fellows you are, both of you. I wonder who it was defined man as a rational animal. It was the most premature definition ever given. Man is many things, but he is not rational. I am glad he is not, after all, though I wish you chaps would not squabble over the picture. You had much better let me have it, Basil. This silly boy doesn't really want it, and I really do.
If you let anyone have it but me, Basil, I shall never forgive you,
cried Dorian Gray.
And I don't allow people to call me a silly boy.
You know the picture is yours, Dorian. I gave it to you before it existed.
And you know you have been a little silly, Mr. Gray, and that you don't really object to being reminded that you are extremely young.
I should have objected very strongly this morning, Lord Henry.
Ah, this morning. You have lived since then.
There came a knock at the door, and the butler entered with a laden tea-tray, and set it down upon a small Japanese table. There was a rattle of cups and saucers, and the hissing of a fluted Georgian urn. 2 globe-shaped china dishes were brought in by a page. Dorian Gray went over and poured out the tea. The 2 men sauntered languidly to the table, and examined what was under the covers.
Let us go to the theatre tonight,
said Lord Henry.
There is sure to be something on somewhere. I have promised to dine at White's, but it is only with an old friend, so I can send him a wire to say that I am ill, or that I am prevented from coming in consequence of a subsequent engagement. I think that would be a rather nice excuse. It would have all the surprise of candour.
It is such a bore putting on one's dress clothes,
muttered Hallward.
and when one has them on, they are so horrid.
Yes,
Answered Lord Henry dreamily.
the costume of the 19th century is detestable. It is so sombre, so depressing. Sin is the only real colour element left in modern life.
You really must not say things like that before Dorian, Harry.
Before which Dorian? The one who is pouring out tea for us, or the one in the picture?
Before either.
I should like to come to the theatre with you, Lord Henry.
Said the lad.
Then you shall come. And you will come too, Basil, won't you?
I can't really. I would sooner not. I have a lot of work to do.
Well then, you and I will go alone, Mr. Gray.
I should like that awfully.
The painter bit his lip and walked over, cup in hand, to the picture.
I shall stay with the real Dorian,
he said sadly.
Is this the real Dorian?
Cried the original of the portrait, strolling across to him.
Am I really like that?
Yes, you are just like that.
How wonderful, Basil.
At least you are like it in appearance, but it will never alter.
Sighed Hallward.
That is something.
What a fuss people make about fidelity.
Exclaimed Lord Henry.
Why, even in love it is purely a question for physiology. It has nothing to do with our own will. Young men want to be faithful and are not. Old men want to be faithless and cannot. That is all one can say.
Don't go to the theatre tonight, Dorian,
said Hallward.
Stop and dine with me.
I can't, Basil,
Why?
because I have promised Lord Henry Wotton to go with him.
He won't like you any better for keeping your promises. He always breaks his own. I beg you not to go.
Dorian Gray laughed and shook his head.
I entreat you.
The lad hesitated and looked over at Lord Henry, who was watching them from the tea-table with an amused smile.
I must go, Basil.
He answered.
Very well,
said Hallward, and he went over and laid down his cup on the tray.
It is rather late, and as you have to dress, you had better lose no time. Goodbye, Harry. Goodbye, Dorian. Come and see me soon. Come tomorrow.
Certainly.
You won't forget?
No, of course not.
Cried Dorian.
And Harry,
Yes, Basil?
remember what I asked you when we were in the garden this morning.
I have forgotten it.
I trust you.
I wish I could trust myself.
Said Lord Henry, laughing.
Come, Mr. Gray, my hansom is outside, and I can drop you at your own place. Goodbye, Basil. It has been a most interesting afternoon.
As the door closed behind them, the painter flung himself down on a sofa, and a look of pain came into his face. End of chapter 2.
Spoke. Basil, I'm tired of standing here, he said. I'm too hot. I want to go out into the garden. Oh, Dorian, I'm sorry, replied Basil. When I am painting, I think of nothing else. Yes, you can go into the garden. Harry, you go with Dorian. I'll go on painting. Harry and Dorian went out into the garden. Dorian was thinking about the things Harry had said. Come and sit under the laurel tree, said Harry. You must not get burned by the sun. So they sat on the long wooden seat. Dorian looked at the man who was sitting beside him. Harry was much older and cleverer than he was. Why mustn't I get sunburnt? Dorian asked. Your skin is pale. You mustn't get sunburnt because you must take care of your beauty, said Harry. You are young and you are beautiful, and youth is very valuable. Dorian looked at Harry's long white hands and listened to Harry's beautiful, slow voice. One day you will be old, said Harry. Your face will be wrinkled. You will be old and wrinkled and ugly. You will not be young, so you will not be beautiful any more, and it will be too late to do anything interesting and exciting. So, Mr. Gray, you must enjoy life while you are young and beautiful. You must do everything you want to do. You must find out about life and people. You must not worry about what other people think. Suddenly they heard Basil's voice. He sounded happy. I'm waiting, he called. Come back into the studio so I can continue painting. I'm painting very well today. Dorian stood without speaking while Basil painted. Harry sat in the armchair. The room was very quiet. The curtains moved gently, and there was the sweet smell of flowers. After a quarter of an hour, Basil stopped painting. He looked at Dorian for a long time. Then, for a long time, he looked at the picture. "It is finished at last!" he cried. Then he picked up a paintbrush. He wrote his name in large red letters at the bottom of the picture. Harry walked across the studio to look at the picture. It was a wonderful painting, and it looked exactly like Dorian. "Congratulations, Basil," said Harry. "It is the best portrait I have ever seen. Dorian, come and look at yourself." Dorian stood in front of the painting and looked at it. At first he was pleased. He smiled at the painting. He smiled because he saw that he was a beautiful young man. Then Dorian stopped smiling. Suddenly he remembered what Harry had said in the garden. Dorian Gray was young and beautiful now, but soon he would be old and wrinkled and ugly. He would not have blonde hair or bright blue eyes. No one would want to look at him then. Silently, Dorian stood in front of his picture. Basil did not understand why the young man was silent. Basil was confused. "Don't you like the picture?" he asked. "Of course he likes it," said Harry. "It's a wonderful painting. I want to buy it, Basil. I must buy it." "No, Harry," replied Basil. "I can't sell it. The picture belongs to Dorian. I have given it to him." "Dorian is very lucky," said Harry. Then Dorian spoke. "It's very sad," he whispered. "I shall grow old and wrinkled and ugly, but this picture will always be young. This picture will never be older than it is today. I wish that I could always be young. I wish that the picture could grow old instead of me. I would give anything and everything for this to happen. I would give my soul." "It would not be very nice for Basil if the painting grew old, Dorian," said Harry, laughing. "That's right," said Basil, laughing too. "I don't want that to happen. I don't want an old, ugly picture." But Dorian did not laugh. "You care about your painting more than you care about me, Basil," he shouted. "You care about me now because I am young and beautiful. When I am old and ugly, you won't care about me any more. It's not fair that the picture will always be beautiful," Dorian said. "I hate the picture. It will be young when I am old." Dorian ran to the big armchair. He laid his head on his arms and cried. "Harry," said Basil angrily, "this has happened because of you. This is your fault. I asked you not to talk to Dorian." Harry shook his head. "No, Basil, it's not my fault. Dorian is learning about life." "Well," said Basil, "you are my two closest friends, but you have made me hate my best painting, so I will destroy it." Basil picked up a knife from a table near him. He was going to cut up the picture and destroy it. Suddenly Dorian ran across the room and pulled the knife from Basil's hand. "Don't, Basil! Don't destroy the painting! It would be murder! Don't, please!" "Well, I'm happy that you like the picture now, Dorian," said Basil. "When the paint is dry, you can have your portrait. Now," he continued, "shall we have some tea?" Basil rang a bell, and soon his servant brought the tea. The three friends drank their tea quietly. Then Harry spoke. "Let's go to the theatre this evening," he said. "I don't think I want to go to the theatre," answered Basil. "I would very much like to go to the theatre with you, Lord Henry," said Dorian quickly. "Don't go, Dorian," said Basil. "Stay here and have dinner with me." "I can't, Basil. I want to go to the theatre with Lord Henry," said Dorian. Harry listened and smiled. He knew Dorian would go with him.